Good morning, everybody. We're live here from the birdhouse. It is Tuesday, October 22nd. And if your yard looks anything like the backyard here at the birdhouse behind the store at our bird feeders, it is covered in grackles today and some other blackbirds. So I thought how fitting to talk about the grackles, blackbirds coming to the feeders, and throwing in the sparrows too, because I know a lot of you guys have sparrows, and what you can best do to kind of help some of those giant flocks. If you don't want the giant flocks of the blackbirds or sparrows, how you can keep them out of your feeders and even houses during nesting season. So we'll talk about that today. As always, we love to know what kind of things you're seeing. If you have any sightings, absolutely throw those in the comments. And if you have any questions, you can put those in there too, or you can just say hi. So let's get started. We do have a few different types of blackbird species that people often get at their feeders, and then there's some that people really don't get at their feeders because that's just not really in their nature. So I'll show you not only what kind of blackbirds you can probably find in your backyard, but the other ones that you might see if you're going out hiking or going out birding. These are the most common ones you can find in your backyard, the common grackle. So common grackles are migratory, just like red-winged blackbirds, just like cowbirds. You might see giant mixed flocks of blackbirds, kind of like my background here, where it's the grackles, the red-winged blackbirds, the cowbirds all kind of group together and migrate together. And right now it seems as if those common grackles are definitely on the move. They are going south for the winter. They're usually one of the last birds to leave and one of the first to come back. So they are a sign of spring. When we see them come back, usually around March or so is when they start flowing back in. And looks like they are still here, but most of them are on their way out. Some people do get them in the winter time. You might see a couple, but in general, most of them do go south. Now that might change over time as weather patterns change and temperatures change, but that is to be seen. So common grackle, you might have a whole bunch of those in your backyard right now. Same as red-winged blackbirds. So red-winged blackbirds, the male is on the left there, the female's on the right. She looks a lot different than the male does. And if you're seeing something that has the wings that look like a red-winged blackbird, but it's kind of speckly, that is probably an immature. So they can look a little bit different this time of the year, but they are also flying through. And just like the grackles, they are usually pretty late to leave and one of the first birds to arrive back in the spring. And then another bird that tends to group up with the grackles and red-winged blackbirds are these brown-headed cowbirds. I haven't seen a whole bunch of them around in the past few weeks. That doesn't mean anything, doesn't mean that they're not around. So keep an eye out for these under your feeders too, or at your feeders. The males have that somewhat bright, especially if the sun hits it, brown head with a bluish dark body. And then the females are just kind of a grayish brown color. So not a lot of coloration on the female. Brown-headed cowbirds are best known for being nest parasites, meaning the female will lay her eggs in the nests of other birds, and those birds will raise the young. So there can usually be a big size difference between the bird that is raising the cowbird, the bird that the egg has been laid in, whose nest it's been laid in, and the cowbird size, as shown on the picture on the left there. We've got a little chipping sparrow that's feeding the brown-headed cowbird baby. So you can see just how big the size difference can be sometimes with who's raising that brown-headed cowbird baby. And usually those babies grow faster than whatever is supposed to be in the nest. So the parent tends to feed the cowbird baby more because it seems more fit and has better success, better chance of surviving. So we see that brown-headed cowbirds laying their eggs not only in nest boxes, sometimes they're found in nest boxes, sometimes they're found in the nests of things like cardinals and blue jays or even warblers. So if you ever see a bird that is feeding another bird that doesn't look anything like it, could be brown-headed cowbird baby. And that's something that you would see in the spring, not this time of the year. And then often grouped in with blackbirds, although they're not technically in the blackbird family, are European starlings. And European starlings aren't migratory, so they're going to be here all year round. but they can ebb and flow with people's feeders, and these tips that I'll give you today will help keep them at bay as well. They were first introduced to the U.S. in 1890. There were some, not even that many, that were released in Central Park in hopes that all the birds mentioned in Shakespeare's work and Shakespeare's literature would become established in the New World. A lot of them didn't, but the European starling absolutely did. And all of the European starlings that we have in the country today are descendants of those birds that were released in Central Park. So pretty incredible. And right now, the European starlings will probably look like this. Some of them are still molting and might have those iridescent kind of purplish, bluish, greenish feathers with the polka dots. But as the season goes on, and we get more into the winter, they're going to look like this. They are dark colored with brightly colored white spots on them. So they're very speckled. They're very beautiful, but they can also form huge flocks and really decimate feeders. Blackbirds tend to get a bad rap here and there. Some people really don't want them at their feeders at all, but keep in mind there are other birds in that blackbird family that people tend to adore, like the Baltimore oriole. So this is a bird that's pretty common in backyards in the spring. It'll come to jelly and oranges. We talk about them a lot as we get into the spring months. They're going south for the winter, so they're out of here. But then there's also the orchard oriole, another migratory bird in that blackbird family. Eastern meadowlarks, a bird that you can find out in the grasslands. They are also in the blackbird family, same as the bobolink. This is another grassland bird in that blackbird family. And then there's also what's called a rusty blackbird. And sometimes these can be found in those mixed flocks of the red-winged blackbirds and the grackles and the brown-headed cowbirds. They're just not as common as the other blackbirds are. And then thought I would throw in house sparrows too, because they can be a nuisance at people's feeders and during nesting season in their nest boxes. House sparrows are another bird that was introduced to the U.S., and they were introduced in the 1850s for nostalgic reasons and to help control insect populations. But when it was realized that house sparrows do not regularly eat insects outside the nesting season, the bird's range had already spread tremendously. So they were introduced, and they have also spread throughout the whole U.S. So that is the house sparrow. But we do have a whole bunch of other sparrows too that people tend to really like having in their backyards. So don't confuse the house sparrow with some other really beautiful native sparrows that we have, especially during nesting season if you're trying to control one or the other. We have things like the American tree sparrow on the left here, which is coming back down here from the north for the winter. We have white-throated sparrow, there's song sparrow, even those little juncos that everybody loves so much, those are sparrows. So sparrows can sometimes have a bad reputation, but there's so many different types, not just that house sparrow. Some of these birds are cavity nesters, like the European starling and the house sparrow. So those two introduced species that I just mentioned today, they are cavity nesters. So they do compete a lot for nesting cavities during breeding season. So nest site competition can be pretty intense. But keep in mind, you can always remove the nests of these birds from the birdhouses. So if you're trying to attract things like bluebirds on the left here, that's the same kind of size house that the house sparrows tend to use. If you're trying to attract screech owls or even woodpeckers and you put up boxes for them, European starlings tend to use those. And sometimes they'll make the holes bigger on the house in order to squeeze in. If that's the case, you can always put these little portals over the entrance hole of the house so you can make it a certain size so certain birds don't fit in. If you want to make it small enough that sparrows can't fit into the house, we have chickadee portals, we have wren portals. They're just small enough that the sparrow can't squeak inside, but the chickadees and wrens can. So we do have those. We also have them in bluebird sizes. If you have a house that was bluebird size and then the birds like the starlings or even woodpeckers are making the hole so big, you can still put one of these little guards over the entrance hole there to make it smaller. And just in general with nesting and nest boxes, the size of the hole and the dimensions of the house will dictate what can go inside. So that's what makes a chickadee house different from, say, a screech owl house. And we talk a lot about that when we're in nesting season in the spring months. But if you do have sparrows or starlings that do nest in your nest boxes, keep in mind you can always remove those. You can remove the nests, you can remove the eggs, you could remove the birds themselves if you wanted to, because they aren't protected, because they are an introduced, considered invasive species. And this is an example on the left of a house sparrow nest. They're pretty messy. They'll build nests on top of nests. Sometimes there's trash in there. There's all kinds of stuff that they use to build their nest with. It's a pretty messy situation with the house sparrow. European starling nests are quite neat, actually. They're usually a whole bunch of woven grasses. Sometimes there's feathers in there. Sometimes there's some leaves. And they have these light blue eggs, but they use a lot of long dried grasses for their nesting. And you can always remove those if you wish to during nesting season, if you've got house sparrows or European starlings nesting where you do not want them. And we'll talk about this more in the spring, but there are things like sparrow-resistant houses. You can get things called sparrow spookers or sparrow scarers, which are shiny reflective pieces of tape that you can attach to your birdhouse to kind of scare them away. So there are things you can do to keep them away from houses during that nesting season. Sometimes they'll go in houses this time of the year, but it's not really to nest and to lay eggs and raise young. It's going to be more to stay out of the elements, stay out of the snow, stay out of the rain, stay out of the cold. So you don't have to really worry so much about managing nest boxes this time of the year. It's going to be more feeders and keeping them out of your feeders. But if you haven't removed any nests from your nest boxes, now is a fabulous time to do it, to be all ready for the spring. You don't want to let those nests pile up one on top of the other. It's not good for the birds. They can get parasites in their feathers. It can get moldy in there. So you just want to make sure you do clean those out. But anyway, if you do have these flocks of birds coming to your feeders, there are some things that you can do. First of all, the seed does matter. So if you've got seed that looks like this, that has a lot of little pieces in it, a lot of little yellow pieces like the millet or the cracked corn, those little round red things are called red millet or milo. The birds tend not to eat the milo at all. The red millet, they eat very little, and they tend to just throw that on the ground. Cracked corn and white millet, they will eat, but they sometimes leave that to last, throw that on the ground, and they're going for those big pieces of seed like the sunflower seed. So first of all, in order to keep the mess at bay, you want to make sure you don't get a seed mix that has all these fillers in it, that has all these little yellow pieces in it. Not only do the blackbirds tend to throw those on the ground, all the other birds will throw them on the ground. And if you have this massive, massive group of blackbirds and they're really hungry, they will eat these little seeds, and you might get them all over the ground, all over your feeders from all those scraps that the birds left behind. So having a seed blend that doesn't have a lot of fillers in it is always good. If you're not sure what kind of seed to feed, you can't go wrong with just straight black oil sunflower seed. That'll give you the most diversity of any one type of seed. But any kind of blend that has a lot of black oil sunflower in it, that has a lot of peanuts in it, safflower, that's always really good. We have a blend here at the store called Chickadee, which is our best seller, and the birds absolutely love that. We can always show you the different types of seed we have here and what you can best use to attract certain birds. If you're looking for certain birds, we can always help you with that. So the seed definitely makes a difference. You don't want to seed with any kind of filler, because that'll get thrown all over the ground. And if there's seed all over the ground and you've got these ravenously hungry blackbirds, they will just go all over and eat every little scrap that they can. But there is a seed that they don't really like called safflower seed. And this comes up often when we're talking about bird feeding, because not only do the blackbirds not like it, but squirrels also don't really eat the safflower seed. So safflower seed, apparently it has more of a bitter taste. There's something about it the Grackles don't really like, the red-winged blackbirds don't like, the European starlings don't really like it either. And I found that it doesn't keep sparrows away 100%, but if I have something like 50 sparrows in my backyard and I put out just safflower seed, all of a sudden I'll have maybe like 8, 9, 10, something like that. So it definitely cuts down on the house sparrow activity as well. But the safflower seed is a favorite of cardinals. House finches love it. Now that we're getting into the winter months, there's purple finches that'll come through. They really like it. In the spring, you can get things like rose-breasted grosbeaks. They absolutely love the safflower seed. So you can get a really good diversity of birds still with the safflower seed, and it will keep these blackbird numbers down. So a lot of people will switch to just safflower seed during these migratory events where these just massive flocks of blackbirds are coming through. Here's a picture of an indigo bunting loving the safflower seed. So you can still get a really good diversity of birds with the safflower seed. You don't want to mix it with the seed you're using already. You want to just go straight safflower, because if the birds are used to, say, eating your black oil sunflower seed and you mix in some safflower with it, they tend to just at first throw that safflower on the ground and they'll pull out what they're used to. So you want to make sure to just go straight up safflower seed, and you should see a noticeable difference with those flocks of birds at your feeders. Another thing you can do to help keep sparrows, flocks of sparrows away, haven't heard much if it keeps the grackles away so much or the starlings, but fishing line. If you hang fishing line around your feeders, there's something about that shiny reflectiveness of the fishing line. It scares sparrows. So that can really help. If you can set something up to hang that fishing line so it drapes around the outside of your feeders, that can help keep sparrows at bay. And we just started carrying this accessory called the Medusa. It's like a jellyfish kind of Medusa, must be that it's named after. And it's a metal cage that has these chains that hang down from it. You can hang your feeder up inside of it. And it's the same idea as the fishing line. Those chains are supposed to scare the sparrows away. So this is new for us. We're waiting to hear some feedback on it yet. If you've had some experience with it, absolutely let us know. And a few of us are trying it out as well to see what we find with it. So we'll keep you posted on that. But this is something brand new that just came out. There's also caged feeders. This is especially good to keep out the starlings and the grackles. Sparrows can usually still squeak into these, but the idea with these are not only will they keep out squirrels, but that cage around them, the holes are small enough that the starlings and the grackles can't squeeze inside to get to the bird feeder. So that's another thing you can do. We have caged seed feeders. We have caged suet feeders as well. And then there's always feeders with small perches, especially for those grackles and the starlings. They're fairly large birds. So if you have a tube feeder, especially that just has little tiny kind of small stick perches, they can't really fit on those. So if your feeder has a tray on the bottom of it and you can take that off, you can remove that. That'll help keep them away. But the small birds will absolutely feed from one of these tube feeders with the little perches. So you can get things like the goldfinches and the chickadees and house finches, nuthatches, titmice. They can all feed from these just fine, but you won't get the large blackbirds landing on those perches. The downside to the small perches are birds like cardinals can't fit on them either. But if you are switching to the safflower seed, that's one way to still get cardinals and not get blackbirds on your feeder that might have some larger perches or a tray on it. A couple of other things you can use to help keep the blackbirds away. We carry a feeder called the Sky Cafe, and it holds a lot of seed. It holds 5 pounds of seed. You can hang it. You can mount it on a pole. It's really versatile. We've sold it for years. It's really awesome. They have an accessory that it's a little cage that goes around it. There's a picture of it here on the right. And it's these little spikes that stick out. And the idea for it, it's called a dove guard, but really it makes the perching area smaller. So smaller birds can squeeze in there, and it makes it more difficult for the larger birds to go in there. I found that grackles and starlings, they can still squeak in here and there when they want to, but you don't get that wide, the whole big flock going all along the whole bottom of the feeder. They tend not to have the room to flick seeds around, so you don't have as much of a space for them to land on. And so that can limit the numbers too by putting a dove guard on your feeder. Now, this is an accessory that's made specifically for this feeder. It really doesn't fit on anything else, but this is another way to help keep those, especially the Grackles and the Starlings, away. Then there's also Niger seed. The Starlings, Blackbirds, they really don't like Niger seed. Sparrows will eat it here and there, but it is a favorite of goldfinch. So that's a different type of seed that you can put out if you want to keep those Blackbirds away. And if you want to keep the house sparrows away from your Niger feeder, there are such things as upside down Niger feeders. The idea with these are that the feeding ports are below the perches. So it's reverse. It's a reverse setup of your usual tube feeder. So in order to feed from the feeder, the birds have to tip over upside down, which goldfinches can do and chickadees can do, nuthatches can do that. Those years that we have common redpolls flowing in, they can do it. But the sparrows have difficulty tipping over upside down to feed. So that's another way you can kind of keep sparrows out of your feeder and still get goldfinches. And then there's also upside down suet feeders. So this is especially good for keeping the starlings out. I know I get a ton of starlings at my suet feeders, but these upside down suet feeders are kind of that same idea as the upside down Niger feeders. The starlings, the grackles, even the house sparrows, they have an issue clinging underneath of the feeder to get to the food. So the only access point on these upside down suet feeders are at the very bottom part of the feeder. So the quote unquote clinging birds can easily cling underneath this feeder. The woodpeckers can do it, the nuthatches, the chickadees, the titmice, but it's really hard for those grackles and starlings to do it. So in general, if you're having issues with the blackbirds and with the house sparrows, switch to safflower. That's a really good starting point. That should alleviate most of your problems right there. You can always add fishing line to those feeders that you do have. Switch your feeders to upside down feeders. That'll cut off some more access to those birds that you're not really wanting. And then in the spring, consider limiting the hole sizes of your houses. If you've got a whole bunch of sparrows getting into your houses, a whole bunch of starlings, and you don't want them, you can make those entrance holes smaller so they can't squeak inside. So hopefully those will give you some ideas of things that you can do if you are having this issue with these blackbirds, especially. They are super, super hungry when they're migrating through the area, both when they're coming back into town and when they're leaving, and they are on their way out, and they're hungry. Let's see, Steel Monkey is on with a couple comments. They say every morning the blue jays come at the same time and make a racket, so I throw some peanuts out for them. I figure I'm either training them or they're training me. Yeah, exactly. Which is which. Yeah, I understand. They definitely get on a routine and get on a schedule. So if you don't put those peanuts out there, they'll let you know. Let's see. Steel Monkey also says, Liz, I also wanted to mention I have a hanging bird bath. The birds love it, but I've noticed the only birds that go in and splash around are the house sparrows. Weird, isn't it? It might be because it's hanging. That could have something to do with it. Birds tend to like things that are kind of more stationary. Another thing that you could do is you could put some little stones or pebbles in it. Sometimes having the different variations in depths of the bird bath can help too, to get some different birds, especially smaller birds. They like it pretty shallow. But if you're getting house sparrows in it, sounds like it might be pretty shallow as it is. But I would try putting some rocks in it, or consider, if you can, getting a bird bath that has a pedestal that'll sit somewhere on the ground, so it's a little bit more stationary. That might give you a little bit more diversity of birds there in your bird bath. So looks like that is everybody's comments and questions for the day. If you're in the Rochester area this weekend, we have our jigsaw puzzle swap, which is always super popular. We have it all day Saturday and all day Sunday now, so it's 9 to 6 on Saturday and 9 to 5 on Sunday. You can bring in your jigsaw puzzles and swap them out for some new to you. And we have people that come in every month for it. And there's no limit on the number of puzzles you can bring in. So we have people who bring in bags and bags and bags of them. So feel free to join us for that. We have a whole bunch of events coming up for the rest of the year. You can view those on our website on thebirdhouseny.com and on our Facebook page. We've got lots of book signings. We've got some different fun live streams coming up. So we've got a whole bunch of stuff planned. We will be back on Saturday with another broadcast. And until then, have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.